Will you marry me? With a glittery engagement ring in hand, I knelt down, maybe a tad too cheesy, and offered it to my beloved Maple. She accepted my proposal, forming a smile through tears welling up in her eyes. Choking back tears, she joyously said yes. It was the happiest moment of my life. Yet, at that time, I had no clue of the great trials that were to come our way. My name is Thomas Martinez. I'm a nurse. It's a tough job, but I find it fulfilling and take pride in being needed by many people. I'm of average looks, not particularly a ladies' man, but luckily, due to the nature of my job, there were many women at my workplace, and I was blessed with a good relationship with Maple, my best colleague. She was kinder than anyone else, always considerate and caring towards the patients. What made me fall for her was how she alone stayed by a patient who had suffered a major disability in an accident and was mentally unstable. Everyone else shied away, but she didn't. I fell for her genuine kindness. That led to me pursuing her earnestly until we started dating. A year later, we tied the knot. We were blessed with a daughter, whom we named Catherine. My goodness, Catherine is so cute. I could just eat her up. That's what my wife would say as she always kissed our daughter's chubby cheeks. That's how much she adored our daughter, and watching the two of them, I felt a modest happiness. Thinking of Catherine getting married someday kinda makes me feel lonely. I said that. Maple laughed at that. You're jumping the gun. But I do want to see her in a wedding dress. I can't wait for her to grow up. But I also want to cherish the time while she's still a baby. My wife was more excited about our daughter's future than I was. Her life was undoubtedly filled with dreams of our daughter's future. However, her vision was suddenly taken away by an unexpected accident. It happened when our daughter, now a kindergartner, was playing in a nearby park. As usual, she was in the sandbox with a friend who, in a moment of distraction, ran out into the road. My wife saved the child by shielding her and was hit by a car. Thankfully, neither the child nor Maple was critically harmed, but the impact caused her to lose her sight. I felt as though I had been plunged into the depths of despair. It was nobody's fault, not the child's, their parents, nor the driver's. Yet my wife could no longer work as a nurse or watch our daughter grow. I cursed our fate, but my wife smiled and said, I can handle this much. She worked hard in rehab to manage life independently and prepared to live with her disability. So, I vowed to support her with all my might and watch over our daughter for the both of us. 20 years have passed, and our daughter, now an adult, said to us, Mom, Dad, I have someone I want to marry. The time had come for our daughter to leave our nest. I felt a complex mix of emotions. It's always hard for a father to see his carefully raised daughter leave. But I was ready to welcome the man my daughter had chosen, so prepared to meet my daughter's fiancé with joy. His name was Kevin Williams, and it seemed they met at work. He made a great first impression, refreshing, and seemed to wholeheartedly accept my daughter with a generous smile I liked instantly. We're thinking of having a small wedding next year. Just family. I'd like to celebrate our special day with Catherine, Kevin said, then looked into my daughter's eyes. They laughed together, clearly looking forward to the day. It reminded me and my wife of when we were excitedly preparing for our own wedding. Watching the young couple, memories of our youth came flooding back, and I couldn't help but smile. I wondered if my wife was thinking the same thing, and I glanced at her. But she had a somber look on her face. Hey, what does the person our daughter brought home look like? She asked quietly. He has such a kind-looking face. They make a lovely couple? Really? Well, I'm a bit sad I can't see it. Watching my wife smile sadly, I felt a pang in my chest. She had always looked forward to seeing our daughter's future husband. I thought she had long accepted that this was no longer possible. But then, after the fiancé left, my wife said something astonishing to me. I'm thinking of not attending the wedding. I couldn't believe my ears at such an unexpected statement. Why not? It's Catherine's big day, a once-in-a-lifetime event. As I said this, tears overflowed from my wife's eyes. Yes, but I can't see it. And if I go, everyone will be concerned about me, right? I don't want to get in the way of Catherine's happiness. So I think I should just sit this one out. Don't say something silly. There's no way you would be a bother to anyone, you know? It's okay. I've made up my mind. Please celebrate for her instead of me as well. With that, she shut herself in her room. Man, this is tough. I crossed my arms and thought, but as much as I pondered, it seemed difficult to persuade her until she said so insistently. Still, as her husband, there must be something I could do for her. A few days later, I contacted my daughter to tell her that her mother wouldn't be attending the wedding. She seemed disappointed but also seemed to understand her mother's feelings, murmuring, "It can't be helped. Stay with Mom, Dad. It's sad for her to be alone at home. We were only planning a small family wedding, so it's not going to be a big event." My daughter wanted me to be there for her mother, more than for herself. I was proud of my daughter, but the idea of letting her walk down the wedding aisle alone was difficult for me to accept. From that day on, I spent my time feeling troubled. My wife gradually began to regain her spirits, showing smiles again, but still reluctant to attend the wedding. As the day of the wedding approached, I agonized over what to do. Then one day I received a call from my daughter. "Dad, are you free next weekend?" "Yes, but what's up? You seem in a hurry. Mom's there too, right? There's someone I really want you both to meet. I'll be home next weekend." She sounded a bit excited and hung up without even saying who she wanted to meet. "What's all this about?" I wondered. I relayed to my wife that our daughter would bring someone home. My wife looked puzzled. I wondered if she had any idea who it might be. Well, we'd find out on the day, so we didn't press our daughter and simply waited for the weekend. When the doorbell rang and I opened the door, there stood Catherine's fiancé, Kevin. Was Kevin the person she wanted us to meet? But then I was taken aback to see an elderly man with a cane standing next to Kevin. "Who's this with Kevin?" my wife asked anxiously, sensing my silence. Right, she can't see, so she doesn't know. As I was about to explain, the man greeted us with a hello, and then said, "Mrs. Jackson, it's been a long time," so Jackson was my wife's maiden name. Only someone who knew her before we were married would call her that. Hearing the old man's voice, my wife seemed to search her memory. Then, as if she had a flash, she exclaimed, "Ah, Williams, Mr. William Samuel from the hospital where I used to work." At my wife's words, Mr. Samuel Williams smiled warmly. "Oh, it's been so long, and yet you remember someone like me. You always surprise me. Oh, it's been a while. Of course I remember you. Because you are..." My wife's face contorted as if she were about to cry. And then he said, "Because you were like a pillar of support for my heart." Actually, when my wife and I were in our 20s, that is, Mr. Williams was a patient before we got married. I remember it well too, because Mr. Williams had lost his vision in an accident, and my wife and I had helped with his rehabilitation. Mr. Williams, now seeming so calm, was quite troubled back then, probably shocked from the accident, and would yell at the doctors. "What do you mean you can't restore my vision?" He was quite a problematic patient, to put it honestly. Handling him was tough, and I can't count how many times he yelled at me. But I did feel sympathy for him. I knew he was deeply distressed by the loss of his vision. Other nurses were fed up with Mr. Williams, but my wife kept comforting him. That's right. The patient who led me to fall in love with my wife was this Mr. Samuel Williams. Reflecting on those times, Mr. Williams expressed his gratitude to my wife. I must have been such a bother back then. I just couldn't accept my fate at that time. But you, Mrs. Jackson, continued to encourage me, and I was gradually able to work on my rehabilitation. I am so grateful to you. Oh no, I was just doing my job as a nurse. More than that, I've always wanted to thank you, Mr. Williams. I've seen how much you struggled after losing your vision, but you worked hard on your rehabilitation and eventually showed us your smile. It was seeing you like that, Mr. Williams, that gave me strength. My wife couldn't hold back her tears. I felt like I finally understood the source of my wife's strength. But why is Mr. Williams here? What relation does he have to Kevin? I realized mid-sentence that Mr. Williams and Kevin share the same last name. That's right, Mr. Williams is actually Kevin's grandfather. It seems that during a visit to Kevin's family home, my daughter had discussed with his parents the fact that my wife was not going to attend the wedding. Mr. Williams, who was also there, overheard and recognized our story from the details about the parents being nurses and the hospital where we worked. Understanding the situation, Mr. Williams offered to help persuade my wife. When our daughter heard about this, she called us, overwhelmed by such a miracle. Mr. Williams reached out his hand gently. Fumbling in the air with his palms up, he finally found my wife's hands and held them tightly. "Mrs. Jackson, I understand your feelings. You were worried about the burden your daughter would face if the other family learned of a relative with a disability," Mr. Williams said. My wife was speechless at his words. It seemed that Mr. Williams could see into her heart more than anyone else. To my wife, he offered a gentle smile. "It's okay. Your daughter has grown up to be a fine woman. No one would belittle you, the mother who raised her. Let's attend the wedding together." That was all my wife needed to hear. She clung to Mr. Williams, seeking comfort, and cried like a child. Thus, the wedding was held without a hitch. And now, my wife and daughter are walking down the wedding aisle together. It's usually the father's role, but I wanted my wife to be by our daughter's side as much as possible, so I entrusted her with that role. My daughter, dressed in a pure white wedding gown, and my wife, smiling bashfully next to her, walked together, supporting each other. Their steps were awkward, but they firmly took each step. Watching the two of them, I couldn't help but feel my tear ducts start to loosen prematurely. The scene was just that beautiful. Then, during the reception, the bride read a letter to her mother. My daughter knelt before my seated wife, holding her hand tightly, and read the letter of gratitude. She remembered seeing her mother save a friend's life as a child. I could still recall crying out of fear of being without my mother. I also knew the shock my mother felt from losing her vision in the accident, even as a child. As a child, I understood how harsh life without vision could be. However, my mother never complained and always did her best to do things on her own, showering me with love. That's why I have always aspired to be a wonderful woman like her. Because of her, I am who I am today. I also hope to be a wonderful mother like her. Thank you for always loving me." As she read through tears, the guests also wept and sent warm applause her way. Kevin also conveyed his feelings in a letter to Mr. Williams, whose eyes also brimmed with tears. I turned to Mr. Williams and silently expressed my gratitude.